I'm Kim Eddleston with familybusiness.org, and today I'm with David C. Bentall, who's founder of Next Step Advisors and has been advising family enterprises for over 25 years. He has also personally experienced succession in his family's real estate and construction businesses. And today we're talking about his new book, Dear Younger Me, Wisdom for Family Enterprise Successors, which explores the character traits critical for navigating the interpersonal demands of a family business enterprise. Thank you for being with me today, David.
Well, Kim, thank you very much. It's going to be fun to chat about some of the things that you and I both know. Family enterprises are dynamic and challenging at times, and it'll be fun to talk a little bit about it.
So in your book, you are very candid about the regrets you have from early in your career. So what message does your book, Dear Younger Me, share from your reflections?
If someone reads my book, they'll conclude, David made a lot of mistakes. I don't want to be like him. So if you want to know what not to do in a family enterprise, and I'm serious, Kim, you know, I had my grandfather and my father before me had built a wonderful company, voted one of the 100 best companies to work for in Canada. My grandpa's in the Canadian Business Hall of Fame. We had 1,500 employees, offices across Western Canada in real estate and construction, as you say. And I was the only member of the next gen, 11 cousins. I was the only one working in the business. So I had a pretty open pathway ahead of me. My dad wanted me to run the company. And I think, Kim, I think the place I got into trouble was my dad came into the den one day and said to me, I was in grade 5. He said to me, son, turn off the television, do your homework. And I said, Dad, I'm watching Casper the Friendly Ghost. Leave me alone. And my dad didn't threaten to spank me or take away my allowance. He just said, you can't be president unless you do your homework. I think it was a wonderful gift. He believed in me and he said, I see you as the future president of the company. And I worked hard. I took a appropriate education and studied business and urban land economics. Later on, went to Harvard, took the owner president's program. So I worked in all the geographic regions our company operated to learn about the different divisions, different elements of the business. But the problem was, Kim, I felt I was the answer, and I didn't come with questions. And so I looking back now, I didn't realize then. I was blind to how arrogant and how presumptive I had become.
So what overall wisdom do you hope younger generations take away from your book to forge better paths in their early careers?
I think that if I had cultivated humility and more curiosity, and if I had learned to listen more, that would have made a radical difference. C.S. Lewis once said, humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. So, you know, when I went to work for my uncle, who was the president and CEO of our business, I made it all about me. I thought I had the answers. You know, if you want to become a medical professional, if you want to become a doctor, if you want to become a lawyer or an accountant, it's after you graduate with your credentials, you need to go into either a hospital or an accounting or legal firm and serve in an apprenticeship role where you are doing your articles or doing your internships. Most family enterprise successors that I meet, just like I was, assume that when they go into the company, it's their job to run things sooner than later, which is the opposite of an apprenticeship mentality. I approached my uncle all the time for 10 years, telling him what I thought we should do rather than asking him to teach me. So what I'm hoping, when you ask what wisdom would I hope successors can learn from my book, one is the importance of being humble. The second is that they would become curious, ask questions. And then thirdly, that they would learn to listen. You know, I taught an MBA class at the University of British Columbia for many years. And I told my MBA students, I said, I know what MBA stands for. And they said, yeah, Masters in Business Administration. I said, no. It stands for money, brains, and arrogance. You guys are all about the money. You all are smart. And you're all full of yourselves. And I said, your biggest asset when you join a company will be your brain, but it's also your biggest liability.
Can you share an example of how you learned and developed one of those interpersonal traits?
Sadly, I ended up being given the back of the hand by my uncle, and I was actually removed from the family company. And fortunately, he decided to sell the flagship construction company that my grandfather had built. So my sisters and I acquired that company. And Kim, that business came with its own president. His name was Dick Myers, who I mentioned earlier. He was 63, so he was going to retire in a couple of years. So I had a second chance at being a successor. First time around, I failed. I forfeited my opportunity to lead our real estate enterprise. And Mr. Myers was a master of asking good questions, and the reciprocal of that, he was a master of listening. And I remember Mr. Myers, he had 30 years more experience in our industry than me, 30 years more experience as an executive than me. He'd ask me, so what have you been learning today? He showed me that great leaders take time to listen. And I'm also learning more recently, like last week, from our son-in-law, Colin, who's a high school teacher. When I see Colin, he leans in, says, David, how was your day? Listening means stopping. How was your day? Pause. And he looks at me and he cocks his head and he wants to hear about my day. And interestingly, it's not just wise business, Kim. He actually communicates affection and love by just saying, how was your day? And he stops. So those are two people I've been learning about listening from. I'm in the remedial class, Kim. I'm still working on it.
We're all works in progress.
Yeah.
I like that. This whole idea of the lifelong learning.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you talked about some people you're learning from, and it sounds like you had an incredible role model. But your book also talks about how some of our leadership role models don't serve us so well. Why?
You know, my dad was a keen reader of biographies. And so you can see on my bookshelf behind me that most of those are biographies. I love reading biographies. Walt Disney, you can see it's, I guess, over this shoulder. Walt's a positive one. But I read a lot of biographies. One of the biographies I read a whole bunch of things about Churchill. Churchill was an exemplary leader in hundreds of ways. But one of the things he said, and most of our listeners will have heard this, he said, never, never, never give up. Well, that's a really important trait if you're at war. But that's not a helpful trait if you're trying to collaborate with your uncle. Vince Lombardi became one of my heroes too. And I wanted to be like him. And he was famous for saying a bunch of things. But one of the things he said was winning is not the most important thing. It's the only thing. Well, that's okay if you're playing football, but that's not okay if you're in your family business. Never, never give up, and winning is the most important thing. And I took that approach to trying to work with my uncle. No wonder he gave me the back of his hand and had me removed from the company. And so what I'm hoping our listeners will realize that we can choose leaders who are successful and follow their example, but we need to choose leaders that are appropriate examples for the theater in which we're operating.
So how do we fall short in preparing our successors, our potential successors?
I think we fall short by not requiring them to be different, to take a learning apprenticeship mentality we were talking about earlier, rather than we want to fast track them into leadership. I think we want to encourage the next gen, and we fail them by not requiring them to take an apprenticeship mentality. That's number one. Number two, I think we fail them by not giving them hard-hitting, clear, honest feedback. When later on in my career, Dick Myers became my mentor twice a year. He would talk, when I became president of the company, I had 11 vice presidents working for me. And twice a year, Dick would talk to all 11 of them and say, what has David done wrong lately? And then he'd come to my office and dump this bag of garbage on my desk and say, okay, we got to sift through this because there's a bunch of stuff you got to work on. And then the wisest families I know, Kim, they insist that their kids, next gens, work elsewhere, work outside the family company for 5 or 10 years and get relevant experience elsewhere. And my biggest regret in my professional life is that I only worked outside of our family company for 2 years. It was the best experience I had professionally in my life, And I think my story might have been different if I'd stayed for 5 years or 10 years, because I was learning, I was making a contribution, but my last name meant nothing. I was just David.
Oh, I love that advice. And so let's end with a fun question. Well, they've all been fun, but we just witnessed succession in Britain's royal family, where there's no criteria beyond birth order and bloodline.
Yeah.
So what can we learn? What advice do you have that we could learn maybe about Britain's royal family?
We are going to have the elder generation living longer. So the first thing we need to think about, Kim, is to not expect dad or mom to retire at 65. Second thing, we need to expect that they may not just live to be 70, but they may live to be 80 or 90 or 100. And so I think we need to expect, rather than to have succession, I think we need to expect to partner, to work together with. When my father was in his late 70s and his early 80s, he still came to the office. He became honorary chairman of our board after he couldn't work full time because of some health challenges he was experiencing. My dad's favorite thing to do every day, the most important thing for him every day, was who he'd have lunch with. It was about meeting with existing clients, potential clients, and influential folks in the community to keep on top of what was happening and to learn from them and to share with them. And so as he moved into retirement and moved to become honorary chair, he didn't have the business responsibility of having lunch with people for business purposes. And so as mom had passed away by this time, and dad, was heartbroken by some of the things that happened in relationship with his brothers. And so I made a commitment just between me and God. I didn't tell dad, didn't tell anybody, that I would have lunch with my dad 2 to 3 days a week until he died. So for the next 10 years, but it wasn't just me and dad. I would figure out what existing client, potential client, or key staff that I need to spend, and I just bring dad along. He was compromised a little bit in terms of what he could contribute, but I made sure he was at the table. And I think we need to look to partner with the elder generation rather than trying to kick them off the stage.
Oh, this was such a pleasure, David. Again, I highly recommend his book. It should be required reading for all
It should
next
be written up. We can
generation.
add that. We can add that to my list of required things.
Yeah, required reading. Again, Dear Younger Me, Wisdom for Family Enterprise Successors. There's a link where you can find the book. Thank you again. This is Kim Eddleston with David C. Bentall.
Kim, thank you so much. And by the way, if people wish to order the book from my website directly, there's a spot they can go to, and I'll happily sign the copy of the book personally. So please encourage them to order the book directly from me, and I'm happy to sign it personally for you or someone you want to give it to for Christmas or for any time.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kim. Real pleasure to meet you, and I'll look forward to doing this again.